So that was just a little bit about the Cascadia subduction zone. Indigenous peoples along the coast of British Columbia have known about this earthquake zone for centuries. In fact, they've included in their history when and where these events happen and how to prepare and respond and interpret them. And they have passed this information down generationally. Let's look at the specific example of the 1700 Cascadia earthquake that coastal First Nations experienced. The maps here are of the Cascadia subduction zone, which we know is the fault spanning from northern Vancouver Island all the way down to northern California. The left image depicts the fault in its entirety, while the image on the right is giving us a more detailed visual that focuses on the northern part of the fault line. These maps depict a large earthquake that occurred in this region in the year 1700, which is why it's called the 1700 Cascadia earthquake. This black line shows the estimated 1700 rupture area. This estimation lines up with several black dots. Each dot represents the locations of Indigenous accounts of earthquakes and tsunamis around this time period. These accounts do many things. Some relay crucial information about physical events and how to respond. Elders from the eastern coast of Vancouver Island speak to the connection between the 1700 earthquake and landslides. A Cowichan elder, for example, explains that in the days before the white man, there was a giant earthquake. It began about the middle of one night, threw down houses, and brought great masses of rock down from the mountains. One village was completely buried beneath a landslide. Accounts from Indigenous peoples of Vancouver Island's outer coast speak to the tsunamis generated by the same earthquake. Louis Newcomus, also known as Louis Clamhouse, a Huaya Nuu-Chulnith elder from Vancouver Island, recalled what had happened to the people at Pachena Bay. They had practically no way or time to try to save themselves. I think it was at nighttime that the land shook. I think a big wave smashed into the beach. The Pachena Bay people were lost, but they who lived at Maltzaz, or House Up Against Hill, the wave did not reach because they were on high ground. Because of that, they came out alive. They did not drift out to sea with the others. These accounts contain information about the when and where of the 1700 earthquake, its connection to specific hazards such as tsunamis and landslides, and reasons why some people were spared while others perished. These Indigenous accounts are consistent up and down the coast, from northern Vancouver Island all the way down to Oregon and California. Thrush and Ledwin argue that through thousands of years of lived experience, the first peoples of Cascadia had integrated the seismic reality of their homelands into their most central cultural institutions. In many places within and beyond British Columbia, Indigenous peoples have cultivated what might be called a culture of hazard. Cultures of hazard are cultures geared toward solving problems, both social and non-social problems, that arise from the awareness of some form of periodic disaster threat. Cultures of hazard can be deeply embedded in a community's historical and geographical context and institutionalized through norms, values, beliefs, knowledge, technology, and narratives. As part of this culture, many Indigenous accounts are in the form of stories, which serve as memorable learning tools or heuristics connected to physical processes. They also contain lessons about morality, relationships, and reciprocity between humans and between non-human peoples and entities like water and land and the environment in general. According to many Northwest Coast traditions, for example, earthquakes were understood, quote, as battles between enormous birds that embodied the spirit of thunder and great creatures such as whales and serpents that dwelt in the ocean's depths. For example, an elder of the Olympic Peninsula Ho people described the earthquake as an after effect of a battle between thunderbird and whale, stating, "My father also told me that following the killing of this destroyer, there was a great storm and hail and flashes of lightning in the darkened, blackened sky, and a great and crashing thunder noise everywhere. He further stated that there was also a shaking, jumping up and trembling of the earth beneath, and a rolling of the great waters." Such indigenous explanations for tsunamis and earthquakes not only manifest in stories, but also in art. For instance, here on the left, we see a piece entitled Earthquake Foot, which is a representation of a Moechahat Muchalat First Nation story told to Hesquiat artist Anilsaput, or Tim Paul, by his carving teacher, Ben Andrews. This story, speculated to be about the 1700 Cascadia earthquake, reads, quote, "A man was going through the mountains in Yuquat, or Friendly Cove, and stumbled across the home of two dwarves. They were very happy and outgoing. They greeted him with every respect and invited him into their home. They invited the man to perform, to dance and sing around their great drum in the house. This went on all day and all night until the man tired and stumbled into that drum. It was then that he became inflicted with earthquake foot, and every time he took a step, tremors occurred. The whole world began to shake and quake." The cultural teaching highlights the intimate relationship between humans and the natural world, emphasizing that humans are not separate from, but deeply intertwined with the land and the ocean. In many Indigenous cultures, especially within a Turtle Island context, such oral stories not only record historical events, but also teach important lessons and morals about a given society's culture, the land, and the ways in which members are expected to interact with each other and the environment. Intergenerational transmission of these stories maintains the social order and passes on ways of knowing and being. Some scholars argue that oral histories have unique qualities from written textual histories. Written stories tend to present a singular recount of a series of events frozen in time. But oral stories can exist in variations, as narrators adjust stories to emphasize particular aspects of it that are most appropriate for the context of their tellings. In this way, oral stories can be understood to function as an endeavor wherein no single narrator has exclusive authority over a story. In fact, oral stories cannot be decontextualized from the teller. Unlike textually mediated stories where there is no connection between the author and the reader, oral stories not only hold information, but also signify relationships and are key in reinforcing intergenerational relationships within Indigenous communities. To maintain the accuracy of the historical record, oral story narrators will cite the source of their knowledge, such as an elder or a relative. We've seen here a few examples of the crucial role that oral stories play in strengthening community ties and keeping disaster history alive. And although many oral stories speak to the 1700 Cascadia earthquake, Western scientists believed that Cascadia was safe, and so this indigenous knowledge was continuously not taken seriously. Thrush and Ledwin write, quote, "Despite this history, most residents of the Pacific Northwest, including virtually all of the region's geologists, believed until the late 20th century that they lived on a relatively stable chunk of planetary crust." This dismissal of Indigenous knowledges is a pattern that is reproduced today, as seen in the following video, where a Kulkagal activist from the Torres Strait Islands criticizes the widespread mistreatment of Indigenous peoples and Indigenous knowledge systems, specifically with regards to crises like climate change and other disasters. Take a look in the next video.